So you mentioned, I mean, there are sort of positives about colonialism. There are negatives. What were the positives, in your view, for peoples in the countries that Europeans went to and ruled?
In truth, the imperial legacy has shaped the world so profoundly that we almost take it for granted. Without the British Empire, it's hard to believe that free market capitalism and parliamentary democracy would have been established successfully in so many different countries around the world. And quite apart from football, there's the English language itself, perhaps the most important single cultural export of the last 400 years. Of course, the record of the British Empire wasn't unblemished. It often failed to live up to its own rhetoric of liberty. Yet the 19th century empire pioneered the abolition of slavery. It invested in a global network of modern communications and enforced the rule of law over vast areas. Though it fought many small wars, the empire maintained a global peace unmatched before or since. It was global government that worked. And in the 20th century, when faced with the choice between appeasing or fighting the worst empires in all history, the British Empire did the right thing. In 1940, it stood alone against the truly evil imperialism of Hitler and Hirohito. The empire sacrificed itself to defeat them.
Well, I think we need to start at a very high level of abstraction, because the fundamental thing is this, is if you were in a society which had a Stone Age level of technological development, had no fixed borders, had no institutionalized system of governance, had not yet discovered the wheel, or in some more advanced places, nonetheless, still lived in an essentially feudal system, right, with a very entrenched elite and a very impoverished population. And you had the opportunity to be ruled by an advanced European civilization, right? Why would you not want that to happen, right? So just at the level of abstraction, like Civilization A, which is superior to Civilization B, and I have no problems using the term superior.
I was going to say, lots of people, the moment you say superior, they're going to...
Absolutely superior, right? Because superior in the sense of better technology, better healthcare, better education, more accountable governance, more rights for marginalized communities, especially women, urban development, technology, transportation, life-saving research and science, right? Those are the things I mean. This is superior, right? And there's no objective distinction between that and what's less. If you had that opportunity, what would your society do? Of course, they would jump at the opportunity, which is why so much of European imperialism spread with as much pull as it did push, right? Indeed, the pull factors are often the dominating ones. The British went to Ghana. They said not much interested, left. The Ghanaian kings demanded that they come back, begged them to come back. Finally, they did, signed the treaties. Why? Because British Empire or other empires brought security, it brought stability, it brought opportunities. It brought an end to intertribal warfare, which in many cases, these kings and these tribal leaders recognized was destroying their societies, right? They needed essentially a hegemon. I mean, it's an old Hobbesian story, but that's what they needed. So, you know, at a very high level of abstraction, right, I think that the onus of proof is that colonialism didn't bring tremendous benefits, right? I mean, just in the sense of the logic of a more superior, I mean, you don't use superior, more developed, right, more advanced civilization, having an opportunity to rule a less advanced civilization is so patently obvious, right? That the burden of proof that this was not a good thing, I think, lies upon those who say this somehow brought harms. And I think that's where we then have to get into, okay, so it's a good idea in general, right? Was it a good idea in practice, right? Now, this is where we need to talk about like how it rolled out. Places were better, places were worse. There were abuses here, not here. I mean, now we get into what used to be the debate on colonialism, which is let's talk about the practical opportunities, feasibility of things, things that were done well, things were done badly in particular contexts. But this idea of a blanket condemnation is just not tenable.
I suppose there's two things that the anti-colonialists say at this point, which is, first of all, that there are maybe technical advances and so on, but that two things occur with colonialism. One is the presumption that there are people who are sort of morally better going into less morally developed societies. And the other one would be something along the lines of you're instituting a form of inequality, and along the lines of that, you're also, for instance, eradicating local cultures, local norms. You're replacing local norms with European norms. What do you say to those claims?
All of them don't withstand scrutiny. Again, the idea of a moral superiority is one thing that was distinctly absent in the European mission. If you take the idea of the civilizing mission seriously, right, what it implies is the moral potential, right, of those you are colonizing to be exactly like you. That was very explicit, right? And in terms of life-saving medicines being morally superior to an absence of life-saving medicines, yeah, I have no problems going to the mat and saying that's morally superior. It's morally superior to save lives, to prevent people from being killed through violent conflicts, to give rights to people who are traditionally marginalized. That's morally superior. I have no problem with that. Most liberals would argue that too, except when you talk about it in the context of colonialism. Second of all, in terms of foreign norms or alien norms, don't forget, almost all the places that were colonized were already under alien rule. But it was indigenous alien rule, not European alien rule.
And we're talking mainly here about Africa.
People want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa, and across the entire world, when slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say, who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages? Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, most places. I mean, look at the Malay Peninsula, right? I mean, basically, the Malay Peninsula was a bunch of small fiefdoms, small sultanates, right? Those sultanates expanded or contracted based upon their power, right? And brought in people who had been under another sultanate. So, I mean, the idea of like indigenous rule, I mean, what is indigenous rule in a context in which the world has always been organized by empires spreading as far as they can, and when they weaken, being subjugated by other empires. It is, you're right, most explicitly clear in Africa, because you can actually see what was happening at the time of European conquest. I mean, the Fulani slave empire, which was basically an Islamic caliphate of the central part of the Sahara, was spreading towards West Africa when the British came in. The reason why it was so easy for the British to establish their control in northern Nigeria was because those groups recognized the choice was British imperialism or the Fulani slave empire. And the British Empire started to look very attractive compared to that. Third point, destroying local cultures. European imperialism was famous for its discovery and documentation and celebration of local cultures. Many of these languages would not have survived had not usually not the colonial administrators, but the explorers and linguists and academics and researchers who came with imperialism gone and documented those languages.
Like the lost languages of India.
I mean, the